Have you ever read a piece of literature that's been translated from another language? Sometimes things just get lost in translation. Speech doesn't translate perfectly from language to language. That's why when we read literature or poetry written in another language, it may feel off. Even if the meaning crosses over the language barrier, the meter and cadence of the piece may not. Take an excerpt of the poem Alicants by Jacques Prévert, originally written in French. Deux présents, fraîcheur de la nuit, chaleur de ma vie. Ignoring my poor French accent, let's see the translation. Sweet gift of now, crisp cool of night, passion fire of life. In the original version of the poem, Prévert uses a play on words, present of the present, but this is lost in the English translation, sweet gift of now. Enter Julia Alvarez, Dominican-American poet and novelist, famous for being one of the most successful Latina writers of our time. Her bicultural identity is vitally important to her work and the way that she seamlessly blends English and Spanish together. We may lose this detail if we translate every line. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't try to understand poetry in another language, but the focus on English as the baseline, the expectation, is something Alvarez actively contradicts with each word that she writes. This is Julia Alvarez, balancing two identities. It is a crisp morning in Queens, New York, 1960. A young girl who has grown up surrounded by island breeze and salty air is thrust into the chilling, no-mercy atmosphere of New York City. And to add on to that, she doesn't speak a lick of English. Not yet, at least. She learns English because she is forced to, her family having fled the Dominican Republic after her father was caught under suspicion of involvement in a conspiracy to overthrow Rafael Trujillo's dictatorship. The difficulty she faced being immersed in a foreign language was her inspiration to write. I consider this radical upbringing from my culture, my native language, my country, the reason I began writing. She feels a shared loyalty toward English and Spanish, both vessels used to communicate her thoughts and feelings at different points in her life. And in her poetry, they go hand in hand. English, not the United States, was where I landed and sunk deep roots. I studied 5 different poems of hers to find a shared theme. For my English professor grading this, here's my thesis. In her poems, Spick, All-American Girl, First Muse, Bilingual Sestina, and Did I Redeem Myself, Alvarez fixates on identity as a bicultural woman and breaks the barriers that once restricted the poetic atmosphere. Let's take a closer look at my favorite Alvarez poem, Bilingual Sestina. A sestina is a poem with 6 stanzas of 6 lines and a final triplet, yada yada yada. This is me being intellectual about poetry. In this poem, Alvarez laments the disconnect between English and Spanish, describing the comfort and nostalgia she feels surrounded by Spanish in comparison to the dizziness of English. The world was simple and intact in Spanish, Alvarez says, in intimacy I now yearn for in English. Alvarez takes this mixture of English and Spanish that she experiences inside her head and implements it into her poetry. It's what makes the poem so powerful. When the words are translated, they lose a vital aspect of their meaning. After all, Persianas has a different sentiment than blinds. According to Maria Napiorsky, the monolingual reader might look up the meaning of the non-translated words and think that he or she has understood their lexical meaning. But the cultural particularism remains hidden, subconscious, and inconsistent. In this way, Bilingual Sestina is a poem privately understood by bilingual readers, thus uprooting the idea that the target is solely English speakers, which it has been, historically. In doing so, Alvarez creates an intimate space for the readers who are typically left out of the conversation because of their identity. Being bicultural for Alvarez has more meaning than just coming from a mixed background. It is a core trait that is exhibited in every aspect of life, from feelings of estrangement to how she is perceived by outsiders. It is neither being Dominican nor American, rather, biculturalism is the intersection of multiple identities as one new likeness. Alvarez's work serves to allay the pain of acculturation and the stigma of being an outsider, making the displacements of language and geography to be the medium of art. In other words, Alvarez takes her pain and turns it into art that we can all consume. However, it is made specifically for other bicultural people. This is the central importance of Alvarez's work, not to conform to the standard that poetry must be digestible for specifically English readers, but to instead carve out a safe space where the intimacy of her artwork is made for and understood only by bilingual readers.